Hello, welcome to Holistically Speaking. I am Marella DeVoe, your host. Our mission with Holistically Speaking is to be the avenue through which the voices of holistic health reach you at the time you need it most. And as you know, we talk about all sorts of subjects related to health and well-being. Sometimes it's your nutrition and your body, and sometimes it's your space, your home, the environment that surrounds you, and that's what we're talking about today. My guest is Virginia, sorry.
That's okay.
Ginny's my friend as well. Virginia Rowland, welcome.
Thank you.
I'm so happy to have you.
Delighted to be here. Thank you.
So I want to start off the bat because I know you go to great lengths to clarify for people what it is that you do. When you say I'm not an interior designer, you know, but what you do is so special.
Thank you.
So help set the stage for our viewers, telling us what you do.
Well, it's sort of the umbrella term I like to use is space planning. But the best way to understand what I do is to ask yourself the question, is there anything about my home or my property that really frustrates me, that really frustrates my family, and we just can't figure out how to get that resolved? That's really the heart of what I do. So I like to be the first person people call in for support, and we really look at what are the frustrations in light of what are desires and needs, and then how do we resolve them? And I may or may not be the person to do the resolution. I may help put a team together.
Yeah.
So that's really, so I think space planning is probably the umbrella term. Yeah.
Well, and having worked with you in a couple different settings and referred you to my parents, and I have found that you are so, you have the gift of asking the right questions, and it's really interesting how all of a sudden your space becomes a revelation through your eyes, and how you're, you come up with great ideas as well.
Thank you.
So how did you get into this work of helping people plan their spaces?
Well, it's sort of an interesting path, and I'll get to some of the training that I've done, but probably the most interesting to know is the story of how my business began. Over a decade ago, 14 years ago, I was visiting my brother and his wife at their home in Southern California, and my brother immediately took me aside when I arrived. And by the way, he's given me the okay to share this story with people, and really launched into what a crisis he and his wife were in over their home. And he told me that they had worked with 18, I kid you not, 18 realtors, interior designers, architects, landscape designers, you name it, to try to help them figure out what was so frustrating for his wife, Sean, about the house.
And they were still not happy.
They not only couldn't figure it out, Sean was increasingly frustrated by the home, and my brother had become increasingly judgmental of her frustration.
Right.
And their marriage was really in a crisis over it.
Wow. So what was your magic?
So I really listened to him, and I said, well, tell me what you love about this house. And meanwhile, my husband and I had renovated, at that point, 5 homes and a loft in New York City. I really had been involved in this work personally for many years. So I knew what to look for. I knew what made a home. I just had a sense of what made a home a really special place. So I spoke to my brother and really learned what he loved about the home and what he did when he first arrived, and a lot of those questions that an architect or an interior designer would naturally ask you. And then I talked to Sean, and I knew something about them from the perspective of the Myers-Briggs type indicator, because we had done a family workshop a few years prior. And suddenly some light bulbs went off for me as to why the home was so frustrating for Sean. And that is because I knew what it was she needed from a home and why this home wasn't giving it to her. So to paint the scenario, she has a very busy job. She'd come home at the end of the day, pull into this garage that was really a pit, just unattractive, cluttered, no harmony, no order. And then she entered the home into their laundry room. Well, they're both working, they have a young child, mountains of laundry, mountains of unfolded clothes. And before she was even in the house, in the main body of the house, her energy was completely deflated.
Yeah.
And she was frustrated, and all it felt like to her was more work.
So in the end result, how?
Yes, so the next day while they were at work, I designed a renovation, which started by renovating this garage and then changing the egress from the garage into the house through the front door, so that Sean could enter the home into the most beautiful part of the home she kept neat and orderly and beautiful. This is in Southern California, so you can do that. You can enter a home through the front door.
Yeah.
And it really transformed their relationship to the home and helped my brother see that judging her was the wrong approach. It was more, what does she need to feel at home in this home?
Right.
And that's really the gesture of my work. What does everybody need to feel at home in this home? Honoring the differences that people have, because we all have differences in how we prefer to live, in our relationship to our things, etc.
So I know, and I can't wait to walk our viewers through it. I know that you have a model that you have created that you use to walk your clients through. So why don't you walk us through that model?
That sounds great. So over the years, I started to see patterns, and the patterns evolved into this model, which I call the spaces model. And as you can see, it's shaped like a house. And it really gives people the ability to understand how to prioritize the decision-making process. And it begins in the basement, as you can see, with the letter S. Now, this is an acronym, so each of the sections of the house are represented by one of the letters in the word spaces. And at the base, in the basement, you will see the word stability. And the most important thing is stability. It's foundational, so it's in the foundation of the house. And what I talk to my clients about is two things: the stability of their finances and the stability of the physical structure and the items in their yard. So say their well, their septic. What is the health of the stability of those two areas of their life? Because no matter of change of decor will matter ultimately in your enjoyment of the home if you have a crumbling basement and if your finances are a mess and can't sustain the house itself. So that's really an important place I start with people. Oh, absolutely. Particularly when they're considering a renovation. And part of that is oftentimes bringing in a realtor or an appraiser. What do you have into the home? What can the home afford in the way of upgrades in the event you should have to sell in a week? That's happened.
And that's so powerful because a lot of people might get in over their heads with a renovation.
Absolutely.
And then, you know, instead of creating a home that really nurtures them, they now have a disaster in their hands.
Exactly.
So that's a really powerful service that you offer that I wasn't even aware that you did.
Absolutely. And we spend a lot of time on that because so often the dreaming people will do about their home isn't necessarily based in financial reality. And one of the challenges with renovation in particular is you often run into things that are unexpected. Areas of the house that actually aren't, when you open up the walls, you don't know what you're going to find. And sometimes you find things that cost money.
So then what's the next?
So that's the first.
That's the first step. So what's the next step in the model?
So the next is P, which stands for people. And we spend a lot of time, I spend a lot of time asking questions to understand who are the people who live in this home? What do they need from their spaces? What are their lifestyle preferences? What are their tolerances? This is a really important one.
And as you mentioned with your brother and sister-in-law, even understanding their Myers-Briggs, that's so fascinating.
Yes.
So you look into their personality.
Yes, I integrate Myers-Briggs anecdotally. I am qualified to administer it. But there hasn't actually been a research study to validate this use of it. But I do see correlation with people's temperament and Myers-Briggs type and how they prefer to interact in their spaces.
That's fascinating.
So when there's conflict, you like things one way. You might prefer things more orderly. Your partner might be more casual with the environment. How do we design solutions? How do we understand that? How do we discuss that? And then design solutions so everybody feels at home in the space.
And
really
understanding
important.
how different people might be affected by a particular space differently
Yes.
based on their personality.
Yeah, and that includes things like tolerance for noise, tolerance for visual input. I think even bookcases, people don't recognize that or realize that even a bookcase provides a lot of visual stimulation that some people may have a low tolerance for.
And feel overwhelmed.
And feel overwhelmed and not understand why.
Yeah,
So
that I can't feel at rest. They don't feel at rest
Yeah.
in that space perhaps. And it's
Exactly.
because there's just too much.
Too much stuff, too much coming at them.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
So what builds on
Where do
top
we go
of
next?
people?
Okay, so now we're on the second floor.
Yeah.
And the first is A, which stands for aesthetic and function. And that's a really common term used in architecture and interior design.
Okay.
And aesthetic and function addresses the way you like your spaces to look and operate. So it's a style, it's paint colors, it's lighting, it's
Modern versus country.
modern,
versus,
exactly,
yeah.
exactly. Your heat system, your electrical system, where the light switches are, how do you, illuminating a space is hugely important.
Yeah.
Light, particularly in northern Vermont where we are,
Right.
light is really, really critical in spaces. So that's aesthetic and function. And again, with each of these areas, I look at how do you differ from the person you live with or from the people, and how do we bring those differences together to
Right.
create a harmonious space for everybody.
And I see how aesthetic and function would go hand in hand because, I'm hearing you talk about lighting and think, well, obviously the use of the room would, involve.
Oh, absolutely. Quite a bit of time is spent. How do we use this room? Another interesting thing is that I'll look at oftentimes with clients, or one of the reasons I'll be called is we have rooms that people never use and we can't figure out why. Or
Right.
I'm looking to purchase a new sofa for this space. I think that'll help it get used. But I first should probably understand why nobody uses it.
Right.
And I usually have a pretty good sense of why a space isn't being used
Yeah.
by being in the space.
Interesting.
So,
Do you have?
yeah.
I'm curious about that. Do you have a story of like a space that wasn't being used and what that was about?
Well, yes. Oftentimes, the way homes are designed, and you can see this on blueprints, living rooms in particular, particularly these more grand living rooms that are oftentimes built in spec homes, they're designed in such a way that to have a sofa enjoy a fireplace, the sofa has to be floating. And what I mean by floating is it's not anchored against a wall.
Right. It's almost in the middle of the room.
It's in the middle of the room. And this is a little bit of a jump ahead to two sections from now, but we can get to that. But we're naturally inclined to prefer the intimacy and the coziness of a protected piece of furniture.
Yeah.
So if all of the furniture in a room is floating, it tends not to be a space people migrate to.
Interesting.
So in a case of two rooms where if you have a dining room and a living room side by side, the one that has more egress points, so more doors in and out, oftentimes makes a better dining room. Because the dining room is a walk-through space. There is even though there is furniture, it's in the middle of the room. It can serve well as exactly. So it can serve well as a hallway, if you will. And even if a dining room is smaller, if you can create a more intimate space, it's oftentimes used a lot more.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So we have aesthetic and function, and what
Yes.
follows after that?
Contents.
Content.
So contents is for the letter C. Contents includes clutter.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yes. So when I look at contents with people, it's everything that you've brought into your space and how that is for you. Do you love the things you own? Do you have them from some place of obligation? How well do you integrate the things that your partner owns, your partner or spouse? How well do you integrate what they have, even if you don't care for it? Is there too much stuff? How much time and energy do you spend and money managing things? And is that satisfying for you? Or do you feel more at the effect of them?
Yeah.
So that's really
at the mercy of
at the
your
mercy of
things.
them. And clutter is huge right now. People, we're gatherers by nature. So there's a lot of people struggle with
what you
too
mean
much.
by huge is that there's a lot of clutter. People
There's
are
a lot of
accumulating
clutter. There's a lot
of
of crisis for a lot of people in their lives dealing with clutter, dealing with too many things.
And so, in terms of clutter, what is it that you help people do? Are you, if you have someone who has an enormous amount of clutter, are you
Right.
in there, kind of rolling your sleeves up, doing
Well,
the work with them, or do you?
that depends. The first conversation I will always have is with the couple or with an individual, because I do work with people in individual homes as well. How is this for you? What does this do to your energy? Do you love what you're surrounded by, or does it cost you time, etc.? Is it not satisfying? And then once we determine that, oftentimes what I'll do is I'll actually say, well, give me a second here, bear with me. I'm going to move a few things around. And I may stylize a bookcase or a sideboard and show them how differently it can feel with some things reduced and with some new intention brought into how we arrange the things they have. And typically, if they do have a concern about too many things, then yes, things need to go. Right. So then we have a conversation about where should it go? Should it go away? Can it be sold? If they're attached to it, how can we look at storing things that can be recirculated back in, et cetera?
And I had that experience with you where you helped me shift my office, and all of a sudden this bookcase that was just full of stuff. It was very organized. It had lots of books, but it was just stuff. And with your transformation, it became a beautiful thing that I was now looking at, and it had all these really kind of nourishing pieces of art or the things that were really precious to me, and it was a complete shift for me in that space. So.
Yeah.
So
and we removed a lot.
We did.
We removed a lot.
We did.
And it's tough for people. It's even tough for me. I have difficulty letting things go, and have to sit with the conversation with myself as to why. What's interfering with my letting things go?
Right.
And so that's an important conversation. In terms of rolling up my sleeves, I have done that work with people. I've done it with you. It's a piece of my business. Should people want me to do that work with them, I also have professional organizers I refer people to.
Yeah, when it's too much.
Or I've actually even had one job where I brought in several. It was such a big job that we worked as a team.
Wow.
So yes, I will do that if that's what the job requires.
So aesthetic, function, content. And now
E is for energy.
E is for energy.
Yeah, and energy includes feng shui. And I do have training in feng shui from the New England School of Feng Shui.
Okay.
And I approach, all spaces have energy. Everything has energy. We're energy. And I'm sure you've had the experience of walking into a space and there may have been an argument before you walked in, and you can just feel it.
Yeah.
Well, similarly, our spaces have an energy to them that either uplifts us or brings us down. And the goal in my work is to have everybody, all of the spaces, and this is really the ideal, every space for every inhabitant be uplifting, be I'm so glad to be in this space, I'm so glad to be home, including the out of doors.
Yeah.
And not a ugh. And in terms of feng shui, I interact with that either in a very specific feng shui application way, which is more than we're going to get into here.
Right.
But any recommendation I make is made with the idea of what are the principles of feng shui? What's good energy flow? What makes a space feel great?
Right.
And an interesting thing about feng shui, all of our ancestors practiced the tenets of feng shui because it's really about thriving on the land.
Yeah.
I'm trained in the form school, which is about architectural shapes and landforms. That's part of all of our DNA. The Chinese put a language and an art and science to it.
Yeah.
So it's in all of us.
And from having experienced that piece of it with you, I could share with viewers that the main thing that we did in my office was essentially shift the furniture around. I got rid of some excuse me. I got rid of some clutter and all of that. But I remember you walking me through the feng shui of my office and what each section represented and how to think of the space from that perspective. And then we just rearranged the furniture, and the shift in my feeling of the office and how productive I felt and how things flowed was enormous, enormous. So, that piece, the the energy piece,
Yeah.
might feel a little esoteric for some people,
Right.
like, oh, well, yeah, whatever. But it's actually really meaningful.
You know, where it's not esoteric is picture yourself in your car or walking to your home. You gaze at your home, and are you filled with a sense of gratitude and exuberance for coming upon this building, this home, this apartment? It doesn't have to be opulent. That's a critical thing in my
Right.
work. I'm not out to make large, opulent, fancy homes. It's making each home right for the inhabitants.
Right.
Well-considered homes is what I like.
Yeah.
But if even upon approach, driving down your street, walking through your neighborhood, are you uplifted, or are you doing this? Are
Right.
you scared? Are you looking over your shoulder? Or are you discouraged? Or are you frustrated that I'm still
Right.
living here? That's all about this energy piece.
Yeah.
And it's very important that people look at that, because really at the heart of my work is people having their spaces nourish them in such a way that they can go out into the world and do their best work.
Right.
And if your home is dragging you down, that's taking away from your ability to go out in the world.
Yeah. Well, and also the angle that I look at it, if your home is dragging you down, if you're aggravated when you walk in and you're frustrated or whatever, it's certainly not a place for rest or for healing or,
Exactly.
nourishment.
Exactly. And even going back to aesthetic, if you're embarrassed about
Yeah.
how your home looks, that can be an aesthetic issue, it can be a contents issue.
Right.
Will you want to bring people into your space or not? And then what's that costing you?
Right.
To just be embarrassed about your home, it's really not
huge.
great. Anyway,
So then what is the roof?
So the roof.
It's an S,
Yeah.
I would assume.
the roof is an S for spaces.
Okay.
And the roof references sanctuary.
Mm-hmm.
And this often is what people will say to me that they yearn for. I yearn for my home to feel like a sanctuary, to be a place where I experience serenity.
Yeah.
And it's apropos that it's the roof, because it does angle upward, and we think of serenity, and we think of, for many of us, that's sort of a spiritual place to think
Meditation
of. Meditation
or-
space, exactly, whatever. And what I try to help people understand with this model is, if sanctuary is your goal, but your finances are a mess, or if you have a leaky basement that you're not tending to, or if there's a lot of interpersonal conflict in the home,
Yeah.
or if you can't stand the paint color in your bathroom, or if you're overwrought with contents, with clutter,
Yeah.
or if you just feel this bad feeling in the house, no amount of soft music and candles and flowers are going to ultimately give you that sense of sanctuary you seek.
Right.
Which is why I like people to look at their home in this very holistic way,
Right.
starting from what is foundational to what then gives you that ultimate sense of grace and joy and peace from your home, sanctuary.
Yeah.
So that's the model.
So it's wonderful to see it all come together, and
you.
it makes so much sense.
Well, thank you. Yeah, yeah, it
So-
works. One of the things that's been so helpful about this model is when I'm sitting with couples, say particularly in renovation or new construction, and they're arguing over the budget, and they're competing. They're competing for available funds. One wants this, one wants that. And oftentimes, my teaching them this model very quickly, we don't have to spend a lot of time on it,
Yeah.
can show them that, well, handling the curtain drain on the outside of the house, which one of them may really be insisting upon, actually gives you a better foundation to enjoyment than buying the new living room furniture, which would fall under aesthetic.
Yeah.
It doesn't always work that neatly, but frequently it does.
Right. Yeah.
So,
I don't know if maybe you have a favorite story or another story that you could share about how does this affect people's lives in the end? Like, if we had a fast forward view of, like, so what would it be like to get to the point of that
Right.
sanctuary?
right. Well, sanctuary is fabulous. Now, I will say homes are not static. They're living, functioning entities. So a very important thing is for people not to go into any process related to a home thinking it will look like a magazine. And in fact, I often recommend to clients, let's use Pinterest or magazines, architectural books to get ideas. But as soon as the job is done, stop purchasing them, because you'll always see something that's more, better, different. It's part of the nature of our culture. It's just, how can I have more, better, different?
Right.
And it can really sabotage your joy of what you have. The other is to engage with your environment actively. And also to really be mindful of, how do I prefer to live? How do you prefer to live? And what are some habits I might need to modify so you feel at home in the home, and vice versa. It can be as simple as two people who don't do the dishes the same way, and it causes tension.
Right.
Or, you know, one may leave their clothes on the floor and pick them up in the morning, the other may resent tripping on them. Well, how can we design solutions? So it's very simple.
Yeah.
A big one with couples is the visual input thing. I had a couple I worked with on, they were building a new house, but in their old house, one of the members of this couple became very agitated over the fact that there was a home office in the kitchen space. And didn't like the clutter of that. Well, one of the things I do with clients when we explore who are you related to your spaces is we look at their childhood experiences. Tell me about the homes you grew up in. What did you like about them? What didn't you like about them?
Yeah.
And oftentimes that informs what somebody needs and wants from their current space.
Right.
And what was revealed was that this person needs a high degree of order, grew up with a high degree of chaos, so really wants a home as an adult that's very orderly.
Yeah.
Well, her partner wasn't as
It wasn't
it wasn't as big a
need.
deal, so it became a point of conflict.
Right. So I'm wondering, of the person who might be watching at home and, you know, feeling like, oh, this sounds so interesting. What are some of the classic, let's call them symptoms, if you will, you know, that might suggest I really need to look at the spaces model, you know, the different elements, or say I need to talk to Ginny?
Well, certainly fear of money. That's number one. If you have anxiety about your home financially, that's a really important thing to look at. It'll affect your sleep. It will affect every decision you make in your life. It'll affect the joy you have going to the grocery store. Because our shelter is so essential as a human being. So when that's threatened, that's very serious.
Right.
And I'd say work with a good financial planner on that. If you have a lot of arguments over things, if you have clutter spots that develop and people just can't change their habits, oftentimes I can come in and help give ideas. I frequently do have conversations with full families about habits and what do we need to do to break habits so everybody feels at home in the space. Oftentimes, if one of the members of the family is really particular, maybe overly particular, overly neat, you know, it may be time for me to speak to that person about what can we relax, or what is in your life that has you need your home to be in such order. What else is feeling perhaps out of control?
Wonderful.
That by controlling the home. So anyway, those are just some ideas.
Wonderful.
Yeah, we're touching
and I'm sure
on a lot
some
of
people
things.
I'm sure some people identify with some of the things that you mentioned. So I want to be sure to show viewers how to find you. And you know, I'm sure that a lot of people will need your help. So Ginny's or Virginia's website, Transforming Spaces from Frustrating to Fabulous. I love your tagline. Her website is creatingyoridealhome.com. So creatingyoridealhome.com. And just to kind of wrap up, I have experienced several spaces that you have designed, and our office space at the Woolen Mill is one of those classic spaces where people just love walking in. Everybody would walk in and say, wow, this is so lovely.
The waiting room.
And they like coming in early to sit, and it's all because of the space that you created.
Thank you,
so
Morella.
Thank you so
much for having me. I really enjoyed this.
It was a pleasure. And thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time. Take care.